They took our oil rights. We had a lot of oil there. As you know, they threw our companies out, and we want it back.
On December 16th, 2025, radar operators aboard Venezuelan naval vessels detected what they'd been warned about for weeks. Multiple American warships had positioned themselves in a deliberate arc across Venezuela's primary shipping lanes in the Caribbean. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This confrontation is unfolding right now, based on extensively documented military deployments and official statements from both governments. The United States had just announced a complete naval blockade of Venezuelan oil exports. If you want to understand what happens when American carrier strike group power gets deployed against a regional navy's desperate attempt to maintain sovereignty, hit that subscribe button, because this standoff reveals the brutal mathematics of asymmetric naval warfare. Venezuelan commanders were about to learn exactly what they were facing. The American blockade deploys. On December 16th, President Trump announced via social media a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers traveling to or from Venezuela. Within hours, the military assets to enforce it were already in position. Leading this operation was the USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, commissioned in 2017 at a cost exceeding $13 billion. The Ford displaces 100,000 tons, operates with nuclear propulsion, and carries more than 5,000 sailors along with 75 aircraft, including F-35C, Lightning Dassault, stealth fighters, and Fa-18E/F Super Hornets. Supporting the carrier were 8 guided missile destroyers, including USS Gravely, USS Winston S. Churchill, USS Bainbridge, and USS Sampson, each equipped with Aegis combat systems capable of tracking over 100 targets simultaneously. A Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine, USS Newport News, prowled beneath the surface armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles and Mark 48 torpedoes.
Not going to let anybody going through that shouldn't be going through. You remember they took all of our energy rights. They took all of our oil from not that long ago, and we want it back. But they took it. They illegally took it.
The entire force represented over $30 billion in assets and more than 4,500 deployed personnel. Venezuela's response came within 24 hours. On December 17th, Venezuelan Naval Headquarters ordered warships to escort oil tankers departing Puerto Cabello and other eastern ports. The technological gap between these forces wasn't measured in years, but in entire generations of capability. What Venezuelan commanders couldn't see on their 1970s-era radar systems was about to define everything that followed. The moment Venezuelan warships left port, American intelligence systems had already cataloged every vessel. The USS Gerald R. Ford's E-2D Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft maintained continuous radar coverage extending 300 nautical miles in all directions. These aircraft can track thousands of targets simultaneously while coordinating data across the entire strike group through Link 16 Tactical Data Exchange. Each American destroyer activated its AN/SPY-6 VIA air and missile defense radar system, technology capable of detecting objects the size of a baseball at ranges exceeding 200 kilometers. The Venezuelan Navy deployed frigates, equipped with outdated Italian DA-08 air search radars from the 1980s that couldn't reliably track low-altitude threats beyond 80 kilometers. One force operated with fifth-generation sensor fusion. The other relied on technology designed during the Cold War. The Venezuelan frigate Almirante Brión led the escort formation. At 3,200 tons displacement and armed with aging automat anti-ship missiles, she represented Venezuela's most capable surface combatant. Her sister ships included the Constitution-class corvettes and several Guaycamacuto-class patrol boats, none exceeding 500 tons displacement. Venezuela's entire operational surface fleet combined displaced less tonnage than the USS Gerald R. Ford alone. American destroyers had already calculated firing solutions for every Venezuelan vessel. The Aegis combat system updated threat assessments every 0.05 seconds, with kill probability calculations exceeding 95% per target. Each destroyer carried 96 vertical launch cells, loaded with Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of striking targets 600 kilometers away, SM-2 air defense missiles with 170-kilometer range, and AS-ROSI anti-submarine weapons. The Venezuelan commanders understood they weren't escorting tankers through neutral waters. They were moving targets inside an American surveillance bubble, where every radio transmission, every radar emission, and every course change was being recorded and analyzed in real time. And beneath the surface, something they couldn't detect was already tracking them. 40 meters beneath the Caribbean surface, the USS Newport News had positioned herself between the Venezuelan formation and their coastal waters. Virginia-class attack submarines represent $345 billion in advanced undersea warfare technology. Her sonar suite could detect Venezuelan diesel engines from 200 nautical miles away, while remaining completely silent, using pump jet propulsion that eliminates the acoustic signature of traditional propellers. Venezuela operates 2 German-built Type 209 submarines, but both have remained docked since 2019 due to maintenance issues and a lack of spare parts. Venezuelan naval officials had publicly acknowledged these submarines were non-operational, citing funding constraints and technical expertise limitations. This meant American forces possessed complete underwater dominance without any credible subsurface threat. The Newport News carried 12 Tomahawk cruise missiles and 25 Mark 48 80 cap heavyweight torpedoes. Each torpedo can break a frigate's keel with a single detonation. Her commander had already identified optimal firing positions and calculated engagement timelines, though operational orders emphasized surveillance over engagement. What made this particularly asymmetric was that the Newport News had been tracking Venezuelan naval movements for 96 hours before the escort mission even began. American intelligence knew which ships would deploy, their planned routes, and their communication protocols before Venezuelan sailors received their orders. Signals intelligence collected from shore installations combined with satellite reconnaissance had mapped Venezuela's entire operational picture days in advance. The Venezuelan warships sailed with no awareness of the submarine's presence. Their aging sonar systems, designed in the 1970s for coastal defense, couldn't detect modern American submarines operating in silent mode. The Americans possessed complete situational awareness across all domains: air, surface, subsurface, electromagnetic, and space-based surveillance. Venezuelan commanders were making decisions based on incomplete information while facing an adversary that already knew their next 3 moves. Intelligence reports flowing into Venezuelan Ministry of Defense headquarters painted a picture far more severe than initial assessments had anticipated. The USS Stockdale incident earlier in November had demonstrated American willingness to physically intercept vessels in international waters. The Russian tanker Seahorse, carrying 30,000 tons of naphtha critical for Venezuela's heavy crude processing, had been forced to turn away after the American destroyer maneuvered directly across its approach path. After 2 additional attempts, the Seahorse remained idling in the Caribbean, unable to complete delivery. Venezuelan defense budget allocations for 2025 stood at approximately $438 million total. A single American carrier strike group represented over $30 billion in assets and cost $6.5 million per day to operate. The capability gap extended beyond simple numerical comparisons. Venezuela's entire air force consisted of Russian-made Su-30 fighters, most grounded due to maintenance issues and lack of spare parts. The Ford carrier alone operated more functional combat aircraft than Venezuela's entire military aviation inventory. Russian military advisors embedded with Venezuelan forces were reportedly urging restraint after their own satellite reconnaissance confirmed the full American force composition. Senior Venezuelan naval officers presented threat assessments, estimating their escort vessels could be neutralized in under 7 minutes if hostilities commenced. President Maduro's inner circle understood that this confrontation couldn't be framed as a victory if even 1 Venezuelan warship sustained damage. Maduro responded by ordering mass militia mobilization, calling on millions of citizens to join reserve forces. Thousands lined up in Caracas for enrollment, though turnout fell short of government expectations. He simultaneously denounced Washington for seeking regime change through military intimidation, while continuing to accept U.S. deportation flights and welcoming Chevron tankers taking Venezuelan oil to American refineries. The political messaging required balancing defiance with pragmatism, sovereignty claims with economic reality. The first test of American enforcement came on November 21st when the USS Stockdale executed a maneuver that demonstrated exactly how the blockade would function. The Russian-flagged tanker Seahorse, carrying 30,000 tons of naphtha essential for Venezuela's refinery operations, approached Venezuelan waters on its scheduled delivery route. The American destroyer positioned herself directly across the tanker's path in international waters. No warning shots fired, no radio ultimatum issued, just precise maritime interdiction through physical presence and implied consequences. The Seahorse altered course. After 2 additional approach attempts over the following 18 hours, the vessel remained idling in the Caribbean, unable to complete its mission. The cargo sat aboard while fuel costs accumulated and delivery contracts expired. American warships maintained surveillance positions, and the message transmitted clearly: sanctioned vessels would not reach Venezuelan ports, regardless of flag or cargo type. Days later, American forces seized the oil tanker Skipper off the Venezuelan coast. 4 additional tankers that had been heading toward Venezuela immediately changed course after learning of the seizure. Venezuelan officials denounced the action as piracy and violation of international law, filing formal complaints with the United Nations Security Council. The White House justified the seizures under existing sanctions frameworks targeting Venezuelan oil revenue that funds the Maduro government. Beyond interdictions, American forces conducted over 20 strikes on vessels suspected of drug trafficking in waters near Venezuela and Colombia between September and December. These operations, conducted without Coast Guard involvement and relying solely on Navy assets, reportedly resulted in 95 fatalities. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth compared the campaign to post-9/11 counterterrorism operations, describing targets as elements of transnational criminal organizations linked to Venezuelan leadership. The legal basis for lethal force during maritime interdictions remained contested, as enforcement protocols typically authorize deadly action only against individuals posing imminent threats. Venezuelan escort warships observed these operations but maintained distance. They documented American movements and transmitted reports to Caracas while avoiding any action that might justify direct engagement. Venezuelan warships continued escorting commercial vessels departing their ports, maintaining formations that projected sovereignty while carefully avoiding confrontation with American assets. The Almirante Brión and her supporting vessels sailed predetermined routes, broadcasting their presence on maritime frequencies while keeping radar systems in the search mode rather than the fire control status. Professional naval officers on both sides understood the difference between demonstrating presence and triggering engagement. Venezuelan state media broadcast footage of their warships at sea, claiming successful defense of national sovereignty against American aggression. American officials simply noted in operational reports that maritime interdiction operations continued without incident. Both narratives served domestic political requirements while avoiding the truth neither government wanted to acknowledge. One force possessed an overwhelming military advantage, while the other retained just enough capability to make confrontation politically costly. Intelligence intercepts revealed internal Venezuelan military discussions about impossible choices. Commanders faced court-martial if they withdrew from escort duties, yet confronted the same fate if their ships sustained damage. Professional judgment prevailed over political directives. Venezuelan vessels maintained visible presence without approaching American interdiction zones or activating weapon systems in ways that might justify defensive response. Meanwhile, diplomatic channels remained partially open despite military tensions. Special Envoy Richard Grenell met with Maduro in Caracas in late January, and deportation flights continued with 9 aircraft delivering Venezuelan nationals in December alone. These flights required regular communication between Washington and Caracas, suggesting that both governments retained interest in managing tensions below the threshold of open conflict. The USS Gerald R. continued operations in the Caribbean without firing weapons at the Venezuelan naval targets. The carrier strike group's presence alone achieved the operational objective. Venezuelan oil exports declined sharply as international shipping companies refused to risk vessels in interdiction zones, and insurance costs for sanctioned cargo became prohibitively expensive. Overwhelming power demonstrated its effectiveness without requiring deployment. This ongoing confrontation demonstrates what happens when political objectives collide with military capabilities. The United States deployed carrier strike group assets worth more than 6 times Venezuela's entire annual defense budget. Venezuela responded with warships carrying technology designed 4 decades ago, attempting to project sovereignty against forces that possessed complete air, surface, subsurface, and electromagnetic spectrum dominance. Here's what I want to ask you. If you commanded those Venezuelan escort vessels, what's your strategic calculation? Maintain presence and risk engagement, or withdraw and accept political consequences? Leave your answer in the comments, because those tactical decisions reveal how military officers navigate impossible political directives. And consider this perspective. The blockade achieved its objective without firing at Venezuelan naval targets. Economic pressure, interdiction operations, and overwhelming presence demonstrated power more effectively than confrontation. That represents modern naval warfare's reality. Capability gaps make actual combat unnecessary when one side possesses sufficient technological and numerical advantage. If you found this breakdown of real-world naval confrontation insightful, hit that subscribe button and bell icon, because we're covering ongoing military developments that shape international relations and modern warfare doctrine. The standoff continues as this video publishes. Venezuelan warships still escort tankers. American forces still maintain interdiction positions. Both sides claim their narrative while avoiding the threshold that transforms political theater into military conflict. In naval warfare, sometimes the demonstration of power speaks louder than its application, and the Caribbean remains a test of exactly how that principle functions when overwhelming capability confronts limited options.